Hey there, I'm Jessica Lauren Walton, and this is my interview corner. If there's a cool story in the security field or just something that I think is going to be helpful for my fellow professionals, then I want to talk about it. To learn more about the work I do as a writer, you can go ahead and visit my blog at jessicawaltonwriter.com. Today's guest is Jaz Cannon, an Afghan American woman whose personal story embodies faith and heroism. She is the dedicated spokesperson for an organization called Vets for NRF, which was founded after the fall of Afghanistan in 2021 to support the Afghan resistance and fight against terrorism. In 2022, Jaz exhibited remarkable courage by returning to Afghanistan to witness the ongoing conflict herself. She is motivated by a strong desire to restore freedom and democracy back in her homeland. This is something that I think we should all take note as Americans, that we cannot take our value system for granted. Ultimately, Jaz envisions a mutually beneficial relationship between the United States and Afghanistan, all of us working together for a brighter future that is free from terrorism. We're also going to touch upon the connection between Hamas and the Taliban, which is definitely relevant for the ongoing conflict taking place in Israel today. So it's going to be a good one. I'm really excited to speak to Jaz. So let's get in there and get started. Hey, Jaz. It's good to
Hi,
see
how
you.
are
Yeah, why don't
you?
you hold up that mug? Show us some
Okay.
branding from your organization.
I'm actually going to do this in a more like what do you say, commercial style. Order your Vets Murder of mug today.
I do
Wait.
have to say, I've watched, several of your amazing videos, and I know English isn't your first language, but you're so articulate, like more articulate than the majority of Americans. So you speak like 5 languages, right?
I mean, you can say that sort of. Yeah, some I can speak, some mostly I can speak better than actually reading it. I love it.
So let's talk about you. Let's talk about your background
Right.
before we jump in to the topic at hand. Just briefly, tell me a little bit about yourself, including what brought you from Afghanistan to America.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm just very happy to be here with you right now. So I'm excited about our discussion today. I am an Afghan American. I was born in Kabul, Afghanistan. I was a child when my family and we immigrated from Afghanistan during the first reign of the Taliban in the 90s. I lost many of my relatives. My family and we struggled through both political and religious persecution for several years until we successfully immigrated to the West in the early 2000. And it was God's blessings and a miracle that we made it out well and alive. I am an immigration resettlement counselor by profession, and I'm also an advocate for Vets for NRF organization. Um, Through Vets for NRF organization, I produce videos that inform and educate the American audience about what exactly is really going on in Afghanistan. I
Okay,
love it.
so speaking of Afghanistan, something I was struck by in one of your videos was your description of a particular scene during the American withdrawal from Afghanistan in August 2021. So during the chaos at Kabul airport, desperate Afghans were willing to place their children in the hands of American soldiers. You pointed out in your video the incredible level of trust that these Afghans had to have in the soldiers, basically because of the brand that they represent. And I think it's really important for Americans to understand this brand you're referring to. In the United States today, we're facing an increasing lack of national pride in our younger generation, an unprecedented military recruitment crisis, and a lack of coherence in our strategic communications with our foreign audiences. But in order to more effectively communicate with these audiences, we have to know the value system that we're trying to promote. And I don't think we have such great clarity about that in America. So I want to know, as somebody coming from Afghanistan, you know, what is the American brand to you? What do you believe that America stands for?
Yeah, yeah, wow. Well, first, I really want to thank you for watching my videos and, for supporting us. I must say that I'm not a veteran, but I am a supporter and advocate for veteran causes, and I'm a strong supporter of our U.S. military. I remember the video that you mentioned. I remember it because I meant everything I said in that video. What I was trying to point out in that video was that the Afghan people truly appreciate the sacrifices of the US military in Afghanistan. And I wanted to show that some mainstream media and some government officials were blatantly lying that the Afghan people wanted this so-called occupation of Afghanistan by the US forces to end. I wanted to show that the Afghan people did not consider the U.S. military as an occupying force. As Legend, the founder of Vets for Nerve, says, America was a liberating force, and the Afghan people knew the difference between an occupying force and a liberating force. This was even evident during the August 2021 chaotic withdrawal from the Kabul airport, where we were watching Afghan parents handing over their infants and their children to the US military on the other side of the fence.
Yeah.
So, right. So remember, Jessica, that in the 1980s, when the Russian forces were defeated in Afghanistan and they were withdrawing, you never saw any Afghan parents handing over their children to Russian soldiers or begging them to take their children to Russia. That's because the Afghans did not trust them, So in contrast, when failing American politicians decided to end the war after winning the war, when they decided to abandon the Afghan people, even then, during those difficult times, the Afghan people still trusted the US military. The Afghans trusted the US military, the US soldiers and the Marines, not the US politicians. And it was because of that appreciation, the faith, and the trust that we had in the American military that they were handing their children to the U.S. soldiers. Now,
that speaks very highly. I was just going to say that speaks very highly of the U.S. military's conduct, in
yes.
Afghanistan. I mean, those were relationships that were built over years.
20 years. And the Afghan people, they did experience true freedom for these past 20 years. They never thought it was going to end up like this. Now, and I want to go back to I think your question you mentioned about, as an Afghan woman, what does America stand for you? So right. For me, I would say, simply put, America stands for my freedom, a freedom that is guaranteed, but I think I will quote Legend's words here, because he said it best. He says that a lot of us come to America as refugees because of the freedom we are guaranteed by the Constitution. Values such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The freedom to worship and follow any religion or no religion at all, and the freedom to speak and the ability to talk and your thoughts without the fear of death or imprisonment, And so America and Americans opened their homes and accepted us. And then some of us fall prey, to the propaganda of certain groups and political organizations, and we start raising terrorist flags such as the flag of the Taliban. I want to also refer, excuse me, to your statement about the increase of lack of national pride in our younger generation. I am so completely with you on that. Unfortunately, they don't understand the value of the old glory. In fact, as the saying goes, you never know the value of something until you lose it. You know, so like just recently, we saw a protest that took place at a Florida university where students, Americans, immigrants all gathered together and they raised the Taliban flags about the situation in Gaza. And in these protests, you see members of the LGBTQ community, Qs, I should say,
Yeah.
chanting slogans under the Taliban flag, not knowing, Jessica, that the Taliban would be the first to kill them without a single thought or care for their ways or their beliefs.
It's
We see
insane. Yeah, it's absolutely
exactly.
insane. When you pointed that out to me, that there were Taliban flags, we started our conversation right as the war was breaking out between Israel and Gaza a few weeks ago. And, already we saw, a huge spike in anti-Semitism, including at the campuses in the United States. And when you pointed out to me that there were people waving Taliban flags, I was like, what? Like, what's the connection? And also what a ridiculous disconnect that these college students have from like the reality of what the Middle East looks like.
It is really, when I saw it first time, it was appalling as well as disappointing. When
Yeah.
you see immigrants raising Taliban flag, completely ignoring or they're forgetting the fact that they immigrate from Afghanistan and same places or similar places because of the persecution of the Taliban. And on top of that, you see young girls wearing makeup without a burqa, um, shorts, jeans showing skin, and
The irony,
chanting,
I know.
exactly, chanting freedom under the Taliban flag, or forgetting that it was the Taliban that are banning wearing lipstick, beauty salons. They've made burqa mandatory. I mean, for
They made
goodness
women
sake.
invisible. They want women to be invisible.
I mean, think about it. These misguided protesters are screaming freedom under the Taliban flag at universities, not knowing that the Taliban shut down universities for women. It
Yeah.
frustrates me just to even think about it or talk about it.
And it's
Because
probably very threatening as somebody who went through tremendous hardship to be able to immigrate to the US, to then see the value system that you cherish, that you recognize, seeing that threatened. And it's something we really can't take it for granted. And I agree with
exactly.
you that sometimes we take things for granted and then, we miss them when they're gone. And that is a real possibility that, is hard for most Americans to even think about.
Yeah, I think a lot of people need to be reminded why they came to America to begin with, why they came to the US to begin with. And those raising the Taliban flags should know what they're advocating for, who are they advocating for. And in the statement that says, be careful what you wish for, it can come really true in this case.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that perspective. And, obviously you're someone with a grasp of history. I mean, you're mentioning, you know, the Russian soldiers, right, years ago, and the Afghans' reaction to that. And I think that's something else that's important is that, we have to teach the younger generation to look more deeply into issues and to have a better grasp of history before, getting involved, right,
Yeah.
in a hotly debated conflict. Yeah, so I can sympathize with you there.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, so tell me about the organization you support, Vets for NRF, and how did you first get involved with them?
Yes. The story of Vets for NRF starts in 2021, and when Legend left the US and went to Afghanistan a few days after the US military had left the country. Legend is the call sign for an African American man who is a U.S. Army veteran. Legend had fled the Taliban and came to came to U.S. As an 11-year-old boy, just 2 days before the horrific 9/11 attacks. And at the age of 17, he joined the U.S. Army and was deployed to Afghanistan, where he had a chance to pay back the Taliban for their atrocities against his family, the Afghan people, and the American people with their involvement in the 9/11 attacks. So this is something that viewers need to remember, that it was the Taliban terrorists who had given aid and materials to Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda.
Yeah, I love the story of Legend, and his desire to give back. I like giving back to the Taliban as in using advanced American weapons. we can have a good chuckle about that as well. But yeah, continue to tell me about his incredible story and how that led to the work that you guys do together today.
Yeah. So in September 2021, Legend, who was out of the military at that point, he returned to Afghanistan on his own to help save the people left behind, including American citizens and our allies. And so while the media was reporting that it was all over and Afghanistan had collapsed and that there is no hope, Legend saw the opposite on the ground in Afghanistan. He saw the Afghan people rising up and fighting against the Taliban in large numbers. He saw that the Afghan resistance taking on the Taliban, and he saw firsthand that it was not over. It was there that Legend saw the immense support from his fellow veterans in the U.S. For the Afghan resistance. Legend, he said that when he was in Kabul, he was getting calls from veterans from all over the United States, asking him that if they could come to Afghanistan to help the Afghan people fight against the Taliban, our common enemy. And Legend told them that there was no need for them to come back to Afghanistan, and that the Afghan resistance, led by Commander Ahmad Massoud, had enough fighters. And what the veterans could do for now was to be the voice of the resistance in the United States, to tell Congress, the government, and the American people, that it was not over, and that our allies were still in fight against the Taliban. So when Legend returned from Afghanistan, he created this organization, Vets for NRF, which is Veterans for the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan. Now, at that time, I had met Legend through a U.S. politician who had encouraged me to meet with him. I was working on implementing an immigration integration program for the new Afghan arrivals to the U.S. But 5 minutes after meeting Legend, I was immediately convinced. He was very convincing, and I decided
sold.
I was sold. He convinced me under 5 minutes that this was right for Afghanistan and for America. And so I joined him. Now, because Legend is a former U.S. soldier, and because he's a member of the resistance, and because he frequently travels to Afghanistan, he makes little to no media appearance that would compromise his identity.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's why I'm his spokesperson. So Vets for NRF is an organization that supports the Afghan resistance, the NRF, that is led by Commander Ahmad Massoud. Vets for NRF meets with elected officials across the United States with just a few goals in mind. And that is, first, to inform the U.S. government that there is an active resistance and it's becoming larger and more successful by the day, and to encourage our elected officials to partner with the resistance in the continuation of war against terrorism. And so the complete mission statement of Vets for NRF is in our website, which is vetsfornrf.org. And I encourage everyone to visit and see our call to action. But yeah, so that's how Vets for NRF started. And I am a staunch supporter and advocate for Vets for NRF.
So it sounds like you guys are very involved in Capitol Hill. What are some of the activities that you're involved in?
Mostly outside of our networking is to inform our congressional members as the actual affairs that is going on in Afghanistan, and how can we build a relationship? How can we provide a support for the resistance so they could continue to fight the war against terrorism? I mean, there are over 20 terrorist organizations that the Taliban have given safe haven to in Afghanistan. And this is a matter of national security. And we want to be able for Congress to understand this and to take an action.
Yeah, maybe it's not so popular for me to say this out loud, depending on what political circles you run in. I've always been an interventionist. I know that there has been a push in recent years, both by Republican and Democratic administrations to pull back from our, foreign involvement. And I understand the reasoning behind that as well. But as you're pointing out, rightfully so, we don't live in a bubble or a vacuum. Things that are happening in the Middle East eventually blow over, into the US, to the rest of the world, and we can't be uninvolved. We don't have a choice. And I wanted to go back to what we were talking about earlier with the Taliban flags, right? Like, I initially was surprised to hear, Taliban flags being raised along with pro-Palestinian or pro-Hamas supporters on campuses in the US. And so this thing going on, between Israel and Hamas, it's much bigger than that. We know very well that Hamas has been receiving funding and additional support from Iran. So maybe you can touch upon that. Like, what is the connection between the Taliban and Hamas?
Yeah, of course. Seeing the Taliban flag raised in protests across the U.S. is very concerning, and the U.S. government really should take this very seriously. In regards to Hamas and Israel and the ongoing conflicts, I think this would be a very good opportunity to read something that I recently posted on LinkedIn, and the statement was by Legend, and he included some important background, as well as important information about the Hamas Taliban links. One thing he mentioned is that in 2021, Hamas leaders, they congratulated the heroic Taliban for their victory against this great Satan, the United States. And then there were meetings between Hamas leaders and the Taliban in Doha, as well as in Istanbul, Turkey. And then Hamas fighters were seen in southern Afghanistan. They were receiving tactical trainings and weapons, which, following these events, Hamas carried out attacks on Israel. And they were using the same tactics that the Taliban used on their house-to-house searches in Kabul in 2022. And that's why we, started seeing protesters, raising the Taliban and the Palestinian flags, in different locations. This was not just in America, but in Afghanistan, of course, Palestine, and parts of Europe. And, one other interesting thing about his statement is that he quoted, he said that, here, let me read that.
Yeah, go ahead.
That I have been warning about this possibility ever since I heard Taliban mullahs chanting "next Friday in Jerusalem." during my travels to Afghanistan after the August 2021 withdrawal. And he goes on to say, it is imperative that we adopt an unwavering stance in treating all terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Taliban, Hamas, Boko Haram, Haqqani, and Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan with utmost severity and political resolve. We must not allow any differentiation or leniency in our approach to combating these threats to global security. And lastly, I'll just pick this one part as well, that just as we oppose any attempts by the Biden administration to downplay certain terrorist groups in Afghanistan, we should also reject any efforts to portray terrorist organizations seeking support in the Mediterranean as good terrorists. You know, I mean, he said it very well, and they should truly be paying heed about these issues. But another thing is that, and this is kind of like on a side that I want to add, that Israel, they helped the lives of numerous Afghan civilians during the evacuation of 2021. And this shows where they stand in their support, and how they provide shelter and care and even more. So I think that this should not go unnoticed. The Israel people's generosity toward the struggles of the Afghan people.
Yeah, I was very touched to hear that. I was actually unaware of that Israel was involved in supporting Afghan refugees. So yeah, thank you for educating me.
We were directly involved with actually an organization that they helped evacuate. They helped in supporting Legend in the evacuation of some of the Afghans and some of the actually Jews from Afghanistan.
That's amazing. Yeah, no, this is an incredible story. And I just wanted to point out something. Legend is Muslim. You are a Christian. I'm Jewish, right?
Yeah.
And this goes beyond religion, right? And this is really about good and evil. This is not about different ethnicities, different, religious identities. I think it's a very important time for us to join forces. And, I believe that underlying our different religions, there are foundations, of compassion, of wanting to rebuild things in this world. I think we probably have more in common than we realize digging deeper. So since we are both religious people, I did want to end on a question about faith. In a previous conversation, you talked to me about the harrowing journey your family went through, escaping Afghanistan and eventually finding refuge in America. So I want to know, how did your Christian faith keep you strong in the face of suffering and uncertainty? So, what does faith mean to you, and how has that informed your long-term psychological resilience?
Yeah. I love that question. I have a verse from the Bible for that.
Awesome.
And I have it with me because it completely describes my experience escaping war. And it's from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 8 through 10. And it says, "We're hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body." I just love that verse because the way it just really does describe exactly how I experienced, escaping war with my family. And Jessica, I believe that when you are faced with such adversity, and you lose your country, you lose your home, you lose your people, you lose your family members, you lose your everything that you believe for, the foundation that you've built on. And you just, the future seems unknown. I really believe that you have no choice but to develop resilience, and that resilience, along with your faith, open doors to new opportunities, which in my case, living in a safe country. So my faith in God is the most important aspect of my life, which keeps me going. And, I like to go back to what you mentioned about each one of us. We all from different religious backgrounds, but it never stopped us, from coming together and fighting for a common cause, So I'd like to add a few more things that the many people that I interact with, and they think that I'm a Muslim, which is the faith of the majority of the people of Afghanistan. But, I'm an Afghan Christian, and I don't think we've ever had any issues in Afghanistan because of our faith until the Taliban came along. Since the first reign of the Taliban in the late 90s, and then their return in Afghanistan in 2021, religious minorities of Afghanistan, they've witnessed persecution at the hands of the terrorist Taliban regime. No group is safe from the Taliban, not the Afghan Christians, Afghan Jews, or the Afghan Muslims. We in Afghanistan agreed that the Taliban is a terrorist group and that terrorists have no religion. The Taliban is a terrorist group that has hijacked Islam and the Islamic symbols in Afghanistan, and it is actively committing genocide against Afghans of different faiths. Just as Hamas has attacked Islamic symbols and killed civilians in the name of Islam, so does the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and ISIS and so on.
Right.
So fortunately, everyone I encounter regarding matters of Afghanistan knows and understands that the Afghan people, that include Jews, Christians, and Muslims, are victims of terrorist group and not of specific religion. I am an Afghan Christian, and like you said, Bludgeon is an Afghan Muslim. Our beliefs are identical in this regard. In fact, my Christian family in Afghanistan who are hiding from the Taliban terrorists because of their religion is being protected by legend, who again is a Muslim.
Right.
So I think that through our work and through the efforts of the resistance, I'm hopeful that soon we will once again have an Afghanistan that is free, an Afghan constitution that guarantees all Afghans freedom of religion. So I think to sum it up, my faith gives me hope and courage and motivates me to be a part of the resistance, against evil, against terrorism, and against the Taliban.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's inspiring. And I'm so glad that we can bond over that. And I something else I just wanted to add in here.
Sure.
It's what's going on in Israel right now is really dominating the news internationally. But something that happened recently was the exile of thousands of Afghans from Pakistan, right on the brink of winter time. Talk about bad timing. And I just wanted to allow you to speak for a moment about that, because I feel like that event has been kind of pushed to the back pages of the media because of what's going on in Israel. But obviously, this is a very significant event as well. I wanted to allow you to talk about it and, what do you see happening, the significance of it, and what is your message to those people going through their own suffering right now, your fellow countrymen?
Yeah, I'm in touch with a lot of Afghans in Pakistan, even the ones that they finally made it through to United States. And I have lived in Pakistan myself. I was in exile, with my family. And I have to tell you that all of this, the Pakistan's police, they're constantly after the Afghan immigrants. They're harassing them. They're asking for bribes. And all of this evacuation that's happening is It's truly unfortunate, but it's not a surprise. I saw it in the 90s, and it's almost like, it's a deja vu that's happening again, but in a much more worse conditions than it was back.
I'm assuming that these Afghans are in Pakistan because they ran there after the
Yes.
2021 fall of the country. And what were their hopes coming to Pakistan? What was supposed to be the next step for them?
Well, I think their hopes was that they just want to be safe temporarily until either they would complete their SIV applications, or they applied for humanitarian parole, or and some of these Afghans that they come from, they're high profile individuals, they work for the government. Some of these women that were journalists that were being targeted. So these individuals or families had no other choice but to escape and cross the border to Pakistan. However, conditions are not any good in Pakistan. And so to deport them or to push them back to Afghanistan, it's basically giving them their death sentence. And it's quite disturbing, and we need to do something about it. We can't just sit here and talk about it. I believe that actions speak louder than words, and I really believe that there is a solution, and the solution is in Afghanistan, and the solution is the National Resistance Front led by Commander Massoud, because these are the guys that they're constantly fighting the terrorist Taliban. And I believe that that because of the goal of the NRF is to liberate the country from this heinous group called the Taliban, they want to create a space for the people of Afghanistan to live and breathe in the same environment, that they have lived the past 20 years. And this is the solution that can bring the Afghans back to the country and start building back, their nation.
Right. And that's going to take a unified effort. It's not going to happen overnight. No. And so going back to that aspect of faith and resilience, I think you have a really important story to share, and hopefully that will inspire others to keep fighting for what's important.
Absolutely. And, Jessica, I would really encourage you to invite Legend to your podcast.
I would love to.
Give you
Absolutely.
so much insight. I mean, I know the bare minimum, but I believe he's the man that can tell you so much about what needs to happen in order to bring back democracy in Afghanistan, and how all of this chaos that's going on with the unfortunate the freedom-loving people of Afghanistan that are struggling in Pakistan, even struggling in some of these camps in Qatar or Dubai, and even in the United States. There is a solution to all of that. But I really do thank you for shedding light to all of these matters, because how else are we going to be able to address the masses of what is exactly going on? And I really want to thank you on behalf of the freedom-loving people of Afghanistan. I want to thank you, Jessica, for raising our voices and for addressing these challenges that are so critical to the future of our children and to the next generation to come.
Well, I think our blessing for each other should be that we see true peace in the future and freedom from evil.